I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Bob Preston. As Josh said, I'm a lighting and energy specialist for Capital Electric. I do tend to specialize, as lighting geeks go, to get even further down into the weeds. I'm kind of the guy that when you ask him the time is more likely to tell you how to build the watch. But I'll try not to delve too deeply to that. But it by nature is kind of a little bit of a technical issue that we're talking about here. And that's disinfection with UV radiation lighting. We're also going to touch on non-UV lighting for disinfection as well at the end. But there's a lot of product out there that's coming onshore. And I say onshore because most of it, a lot of it is coming from offshore. And it does have some real effectiveness. However, it does come with some caveats, and we're going to get into some of those. So we want to try to make you as aware as we possibly can. It's a hot topic. It's all the rage, and I'm sure everybody's heard some things about UV lighting from the White House on down. And we just want to try to make you hopefully a little smarter about some of the decisions you might make on this product. So with that, we'll go ahead and get going. So while we're here, related to UV lighting, of course, is because of this. COVID-19, of course, is the illness. The actual coronavirus that we're dealing with is something called SARS-CoV-2. SARS, as a lot of you will remember from the early 2000s, is not a new viral infection. Severe acute respiratory syndrome. Remember, most people kind of remember SARS. It was SARS-CoV-1 in the early 2000s. The problem with this disease is it seems much more virulent, and it is also much more contagious. And it's the contagious part of it and how rapidly it has spread and widely it has spread is the reason why some things like UV lighting have gotten kind of a new look. It's always been around. I don't want to start and let you know right away. UV lighting, UV radiation, I should say, because UV isn't lighting, is not new, but it's used more in other areas, not in surfaces. So the virus is kind of everywhere if you read the newspapers and hear the news. And obviously the numbers that we've seen related to COVID-19 are frankly depressing and startling. But the question there is, well, if I'm going to catch it, where do I catch it from? Well, we know you can catch it from people, human to human, but we're concerned about surfaces. We can't disinfect humans with light or with radiation of UV, but we can disinfect, hopefully, surfaces. And you can see here a chart that came from the New England Journal of Medicine, which shows the research so far on the length of time that SARS-CoV-2 or the coronavirus can survive on, I'll say, common surfaces. And it ranges, as you can see, anywhere from 4 hours up to 3 to 4 days. That's quite a long time. Again, this is laboratory research. In the real world, I mean, who really knows? It's hard to test for something like that. But this is kind of showing you the extent of the issue that we're dealing with and the kind of time frame we have in order to engage some mitigation techniques. Best methods of disinfection are right here. This shouldn't come as a surprise to any of us. This is the best way to disinfect surfaces of the COVID-19 causing virus. Scrub and wash, and wash and scrub. You can have all the disinfectant hand sanitizer in the world, but good old soap and water and scrubbing for 20 seconds, and also using the proper cleaning material on surfaces is the best way to take care of disinfection. That said, that's not always practical. You can't be scrubbing 24/7. So we start to look for other things that we can employ to help us out, and that's where this comes in. So I put this, you'll see at the top, says ultraviolet light as a disinfectant, light in quotes there, because ultraviolet radiation is not a light at all. In UV products, you'll see a light, but that's artificially generated in order for you to see that it's on and kind of looks like it's working. The UV lighting spectrum, which we're talking about here, is part of the electromagnetic spectrum. And this is hopefully about technical as it's going to get, but it's important to go into this because you need to know when we start talking about wavelength ranges, where they are and how they fall on the effectiveness of product. So you'll see that in the UV range, which is to the left side of that spectral graph that you see in front of you, and you see the visible light, our old friend Roy G. Biv, if you remember from school, the infrared wavelengths, which generate heat, and then the ultraviolet wavelengths, which is what we're talking about today. And you can see the ranges there. The UVA is in the 315 to 40 nanometer range, and we use nanometers to measure UV spectrum, or all the spectrum. UVB is 280 to 315, and UVC is 100 to 280 nanometers. We're going to talk a lot about UVC today because that is the basis for a lot of the product that you're seeing coming out and that you might be exposed to as you're seeing emails and marketing from different manufacturers on UV, quote unquote, products. Typical UV germicidal devices do emit at around 254 nanometers. This has been common, has been around a long time. There are some other devices which are referred to as broad spectrum. Broad meaning they take in also the UVA and the UVB wavelengths. They're not all the same, and we'll try to explain a little bit the differences between them. But UVC is really the focus of where a lot of this technology is, and that's largely what we're going to talk about. So, excuse me, how does UV work in germicidal applications? Well, the UV photons actually interact with the RNA and the DNA in a virus, excuse me, or a bacterium to render these pathogens, these microbes, non-infectious. So technically, we're not killing anything. The virus is not killed, but it's what is referred to as inactivated. It is no longer able to function. It cannot reproduce. It is no longer infectious. So you're basically rendering it inert by affecting its DNA or its RNA in this case. The question is, we talked about UVA, UVB, and UVC. Are all three of those wavelengths effective against viruses and bacteria? Well, the answer is no. Only UVC can inactivate viruses. UVA and UVB, when I was talking in that previous slide about being broad spectrum, can be effective against things like bacteria and MRSA and staph and E. coli and mold and those types of things. And UVC, as I mentioned, has been used for many years, but to disinfect air and water in enclosed treatment systems, some of you folks may already be familiar with in your facilities. So UVC is the virus attacker, if you will. UVA and UVB is more for the other bad germs. That said, bacteria, MRSA, staph, E. coli, and mold, they're not so hot, and heaven knows they're certainly way more prevalent in a normal situation than the coronavirus. So it's not a bad idea to attack those as well. But we're going to talk a lot about UVC today. So related to UVA and UVB, your tanning bed won't work against COVID-19. Sorry, folks. It might give you a nice suntan, but it's not going to help you in terms of killing the coronavirus. So you're going to have to go to other measures. The million-dollar question is, can UVC kill the inactivator kill the current SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus, which is responsible for COVID-19? And the answer is yes. All the research so far, and there's been quite a bit of it, has shown that if the virus is directly illuminated, if you will, by UVC at the effective dose level, the SARS-CoV-2 coronavirus is inactivated successfully. So to put it in purely layman's terms, UVC can kill the coronavirus. The other million-dollar question, gosh, if it's that simple, why isn't this UVC lighting every place? Well, the delivery of the virus inactivating UVC, is relatively simple and it's straightforward. However, the safety of it and the proper and effective application is a little more complicated, and it can carry some risks, and that's what we want to kind of talk about. So the effective dose level for UVC for virus and pathogen inactivation, this is the big caveat, is harmful to humans. UVC will do a great job in inactivating, quote unquote, killing the coronavirus. However, it will also harm humans. Eye and skin damage can result from exposure to UVC radiation, which is why in treatment facilities where you're treating water and or air, it is enclosed. You don't get exposure to that. UVA and UVB wavelengths, as bacterial disinfectants, as we discussed, do require high dosages, and they are also not safe in occupied spaces. Severe sunburn and potential eye damage are hazards as a result of exposure or overexposure from UVA and UVB. So can I just stand out in the sun for a while and kill the virus? No, ain't that simple. UVC is blocked by the Earth's ozone layer, does not reach the ground, thankfully. UVA and UVB do come through, which is why, of course, we're all supposed to wear sunscreen in the summertime. It'll help us with a suntan, and keep us from getting a sunburn. But UVC is blocked, and we have to actually create that portion of the ultraviolet spectrum, I'll say artificially, so to speak, here on Earth in order for it to be used. So considerations on UV. UVC requires direct exposure to surfaces to work. If I have a UVC irradiating source and I want it to inactivate viruses on a surface, that surface must be directly exposed to that UV radiation. It does not go around corners. It cannot penetrate shadows. Its effectiveness is actually decreased by dust and dirt and other contaminants on surfaces. So UV radiation, if I have it, frankly, even in a light-colored space, and I'm irradiating a surface, and it bounces against the light-colored surface, it is irradiating that surface. However, it's not like light. It's not bouncing off of that surface and being just as effective when it hits the floor or an adjacent wall or something that it's reflecting, that's getting a reflective light. Normally light, you'd be able to see that. In UV, only the exposed surfaces are going to be able to be cleansed, if you will, using UV light. UVA radiation is also affected to some degree by humidity. In very hot and very humid, environments, the UV effectiveness can actually be decreased a bit. The pictures you see below the graphic here, you'll see some common light sources. These are traditional light sources for UVC irradiation: low pressure mercury, fluorescent, and pulsed xenon. Low pressure mercury and fluorescent are continuous light sources. They operate continuously. However, pulsed xenon is just that. It's a pulsed. It's like a camera flash, except for a bit longer period of time. But it only flashes for a mere second or seconds, and it does the irradiation that way. All of these devices, as I said, cannot operate, should not operate around humans. And fortunately, there are, most of the time on these installations, either lockouts or occupancy sensing type product that does come into play, so that you're not going to be stuck in that space. Now, you might ask yourself, and I've had people ask me this, well, geez, dust, what difference does it make if it's the area's a little dusty? Well, everyone who's done any cleaning, and it's all of us, sees dust. We see it on our desk or on even our computers or our TVs or whatever. You can see the dust. Keep in mind, from a size comparison standpoint, that the diameter of a human hair ranges from 17 to about 180 micrometers, the diameter of a human hair. These viruses and bacteria range from 0.5 of a micrometer up to 5 micrometers. So dust is way bigger. It can easily cover up a virus or bacteria or some other pathogen. So that's why dust is a consideration, dust and dirt. The surfaces really should be clean, or you're going to lose some effectiveness from the mitigation. Not just us are a problem. Plants, flowers, animals, they're all living organisms, and they also would be in danger under UVC irradiation in a space. So you have to think about that when you're planning out using some of this, because we certainly, yes, I purposely did pick out the cutest little picture of a cat and a puppy in order to bring home the point that we don't want anything to happen to them. So you want to remove those living organisms, if you will, from the space. So some caveats there to using it. Precautions, absolutely, you must take to preclude occupancy. Traditionally, when this product has been used in the past in areas, there is literally either occupancy sensor operation in effect, serious lockouts that will prevent human entrance into a space that's being irradiated. And the labels that I put on there are not just some cute little graphic that I pulled off the internet. These are actual labels from a label company that would give you, let you put labels and banners and signs in an area. So when you're using UVC, that you're going to employ these. But human risks, and I'm prefacing saying I'm not in any way, shape, or form am I or any of us minimizing the effectiveness. This is all very effective against things like the coronavirus, the UVC radiation. However, you've got to consider the risk. This is not the kind of thing that you can just willy-nilly deploy, regardless of everything. So humans aren't the only things that are affected. Things are also affected. This is a document that I hope everybody's familiar with. It's our Declaration of Independence. This copy, I'm sure, is something you're all used to and seeing. This is how we see and how we remember seeing the Declaration of Independence. However, this is what it actually looks like. If you went to the National Archives and saw it today, this is what you would see. And it might not even look this good. Largely because this document was frankly misused over 250 years. And the effects of ultraviolet radiation on this document when it wasn't being taken care of are really obvious. If you look at the bottom of the page, except for the lower part of the J on John Hancock's signature, almost all the other signatures are virtually unreadable, as is much of the text. Just an example of the kind of thing that can happen. However, most of us do not have 250-year-old parchment documents in our homes. We are more likely to have things like this. These are much more common effects of ultraviolet damage to surfaces and things. You see on the left the dark finish of the floor as it originally was before they threw down an area rug, which of course covered it up. But the sun affected the floor on the surrounding areas, and you can see it's faded so that the floor no longer matches. And the only solution there is to refinish the floor. To the right, you see artwork. You've lost a lot of the color. It has been faded by exposure to UV light as well. And these are the kind of things that you want to be concerned with when you're looking at planning for use in a space. It's okay to plan for getting the humans out, but depending on what space you're using it in, if you've got things that could be affected from a color standpoint, or and it could be faded or it could be damaged in some way, you got to think about that as well when you're doing this. Again, just some things to think about when you're employing this kind of product. So how do we plan for this? Well, here's a typical example of, say, a women's restroom in a commercial application. You can see at the top, these are the stalls, the handicapped, if you will, stall at the far left, and the other stalls there. And what I did is I overlaid, in a typical fashion, the number of UV units that you would need to use to irradiate successfully a single restroom. And the reason is, if you look at the areas that are highlighted in yellow, those all represent either direct blockages of light or area of blockages that can cause shadows that would prevent radiation from hitting the surface and doing its job of irradiating the area and inactivating viruses. So you literally do need to have an irradiating UV device over the top of each stall, and probably 2 in the general area of the restroom. You say, well, geez, if I put like 2 in front of the stalls, that will take care of it, won't it? Well, yeah, but as soon as you open the door to the stall to let the light in, you've blocked the light behind the stall door, and now that's not being irradiated. So in order to capture everything, because the UV radiation won't go around corners and will not penetrate shadows, you need to expose all surfaces. So you do need a decent number of products on a permanent installation basis. And there are some other ways of doing it, as you'll see here shortly. So let's talk a little bit about product. This is kind of where the buyer beware part of it comes in. These are some images, some things that I captured about a week ago off the internet. And let's talk about the ones on the right first. These are different types of devices. The one on the far right is an actual wand that does use use LEDs, so it's very low output. And while it looks promising as a UV disinfection light, and you would actually wave that over things, you would wave it around your cell phone or wave it over your laptop, or maybe you would try to wave it over your desk. The problem is the exposure necessary on that device is so long that you would probably have to keep it over top of the surface, holding in your hand for way too long, much longer than you'd want to. A simple wave of it is not going to cut it. The other two units are more UVC product. And the interesting thing about all three of those is that I couldn't get anything more than just those Google shots off the internet because they are so new. And the companies that produce these are so new, and I say companies, quote unquote, that our security in our company for web security, internet security, would block me from even going any further because the websites were that new that they just didn't have the proper certificates and they didn't trust them. So that's as good as I could get. I couldn't even dig into them any further because our security blocked it. That's enough said on that. If you look to the left, this is a product I could get into, and I want to point out something. This is UVC. It's a 48 watt, 110 volt, 254 nanometer. Remember, we said that's the area that typical products are. I might say, I don't think I brought this up previously. The research has kind of shown that for the coronavirus, 265 nanometers is the actual optimum wavelength. Now, that's not to say that 254 is substandard, because it isn't. It'll still do the job. But 265, they discovered through research, seems to be the optimum wavelength of UVC irradiation for this particular coronavirus. However, what I want to point out to you is the box around the paragraph at the bottom. This I had to scroll, get through to all the marketing and all about how great their product was and how it did what it did and whatnot. So I got all the way to the bottom, and then this is where that final important note crops up, which is frankly pretty important. If you read it, and you probably already have, that UV light, they tell you, is harmful to skin and eyes. It does require people and animals to be and plants to be exited from the room, and they do recommend ventilating and airing the room out for a minimum of 40 minutes before re-entering. That's a lot of caveats for something that looks like, when you pull it up on a website, that, oh, I'll just plug this in and off I go. Well, you plug it in, but off you don't go if you read the fine print. So you really need to be careful on some of this stuff. And you'll look at the prices and say, well, geez, for the money, this just seems almost too good to be true. Well, you know what they say about things that probably are too good to be true. The amount of light that you're getting out of this to cover an entire space, you would need many of these units to do the job properly. And again, you would have to deploy them in such a way to be conscious of the safety hazards. So this slide shows some more, I'll say, legitimate products. These are from two companies that are currently make higher quality, industrial commercial strength, if you will, UVC, and in fact, in the case of the three units on the right, not the cart unit, they are actually broad spectrum, as I recall. So they do some UVA and UVB as well. These are pulse xenon, the ones on the right, the three there, the one small cart and the two boxed fixtures. These are pulse xenon, so these will flash UVC lighting. But as you can see, there's a pretty large difference between a $159 cart unit from who knows where and the legitimate cart unit at $9,199. Now, these are internet prices that I just pulled off just for the sake of illustration. I have no idea exactly where those prices would fall. But even if they're half of that, it's for in order to get effective use out of them, in order to get effectiveness, that they work, they do what they say they're going to do, and they're high quality product. There is a price to be paid for this. Measure that against the cost of something like a coronavirus, then it becomes not so quite a big a pill to swallow. The cart on the left is a company called Xenex. This is a portable cart. You would wheel it into a space, and it does 360-degree disinfection when it's on. And yes, you are reading that correct. These have been sold for as high as $100,000. I've seen the references to some even higher than that. Again, I'm not really sure where this would actually fall in terms of real world pricing, but that's still a ton of money to do what it needs to do. These products would be typically used a lot in the healthcare world, and carts would be brought in between uses of an examination room or maybe an operating room or something like that, where you would wheel these in. The nice thing about these products is, all these products, the UVC products, is that pulse xenon in particular does its job very quickly. We are literally talking minutes to get the disinfection you require or want. So it does do the job pretty quickly. So you can turn around spaces that you would want to reuse pretty quickly. Now, here's the rub, and we get kind of back to that drawing of the application that we were talking about. And that's the issue of how long does something become, when you disinfect something with these lights, how long does it stay disinfected? Okay, I've achieved the level of disinfection I'm looking for. Now I'm cool. Well, I'm going to talk about that in a couple seconds, so bear with me. So keep that question in mind, because it relates to some degree as a comparison to the product we're going to talk about in a minute, which is visible light disinfection products. So here is a couple of comparisons. This came out of a Illuminating Engineering Society committee report that was released actually just about 2-3 weeks ago. It's a great report. It's in a question and answer format. At the end of this presentation, I will have a link on that for you if you want to go check this out. It's a free report. You can download it. It has a lot of information. I pulled some information, as you can see, from that report because it was so well done. But this, what you're looking at here, is the UVGI systems. UVGI meaning germicidal ultraviolet irradiation. You can see they're using the mercury, mobile, or the pulse xenon systems. And when you look at their rating system, on surface-borne, they give it 4 stars, and evidence-based 3 stars. This works. It's known to work. It does a good job, and you can deploy it successfully. It does achieve a very high level of surface contamination, and it can be deployed, frankly, throughout a facility, again, keeping the caveats in mind, very successfully. As you'll see on the disadvantages, it is very expensive, as we kind of already indicated with some of those the slide from before, and it does require some staff training. You got to be careful of the material as well as humans when they're in that space. But it is very successful, and it works really well. Here's UVGI LED systems. There aren't a lot of these. As you can tell from the little graphic or picture of the systems that are already out there, it requires, for relatively quick disinfection, a fairly high level, a high dose of irradiation, a lot of intensity. That's why it's so hazardous to humans. So some of the products that have been out there so far work on surface. However, there's no evidence-based confidence in them yet because it's just experimental. They're too new. They are also expensive. They're small sources, so they tend to have to be left on for quite a bit longer. So it may take your room, space, or facility out of commission if you're going to use these, because they have to be working for a lot longer before you can put it back into commission following disinfection. Don't be looking for a lot of LED disinfection sources yet. They're just simply not out there. Even some new product that's coming from some legitimate manufacturers are actually using legacy light sources, the legacy UVC light sources, to provide the irradiation. And I say light sources because they do produce a blue light, but they produce UVC radiation for the purposes of disinfection. And it's proven technology. So you're going to see them coming out. But it's not new technology. It's just a new way to use it, a new packaging of it, so that it allows for a greater use in surfaces and in rooms and in air and space. So a lot to unpack there on UV and UVC, but I want to, if nothing else, just keep you thinking UVC is what you're seeing a lot of, and UVC at that 254 nanometer range is what you want to look for in that range on a spec sheet or some kind of information that you might see pop up. So let's finish up with a different take on the technology. This is visible light disinfection. Visible light does not in the UV range. It is visible light. You can see this. It is blue, because as you can see in the 405 nanometer range in the yellow oval, it is in that visible wavelength. It is effective as a disinfectant for some of the things we mentioned before: bacteria, MRSA, staph, E. coli, those kind of things. And as I said, those are way more common on a regular basis than things like coronavirus. So there's still some real practical value. However, VLD is not effective against viruses. The light emitted by visible light disinfection luminaires is not UV. It is generally I'm going to say generally thought to be safe for human exposure because, frankly, there hasn't been any in-depth testing on that far visible light blue part of the spectrum. But again, it's a visible light, and we get that light all the time in normal sunshine and through our normal light sources. So it is basically generally safe for human exposure. VLD is designed not to be the be-all and end-all of disinfection and germ killing. It is there to support and supplement your existing cleaning regimen. So if you're in the room, as we see here, a hospital room, that room's going to want to be cleaned regularly on a standard cleaning procedure with chemicals and disinfectants, and let the VLD enhance that and help that. So what I referred to a couple minutes ago related to UVC is illustrated here by this. This happens to be really a cool diagram and shows you what the main benefit to light or radiating disinfecting can be. So if you look at both graphs, but particularly let's focus on the one on the left, this is a daily cleaning only. This is no UV or VLD technology employed here. As you can see, at the beginning of the day, if it's a daily cleaning, we have cleaned the space and there's very low infection. As the room is used, and frankly, from the first time the first person sets foot in that room, the infection rate of dirt, dust, bacteria, germs begins to ramp up. So by the end of the day, it's at the highest level it's probably going to be. And it continues every day, and you just have to keep cleaning. If you look at the chart on the right, if we add in this case, a visible light disinfecting product, the luminaire, while that room is empty and after it's been cleaned, you still get the ramp up of germs, but at the end of the day, there are less germs to start with, so there are less germs remaining. And then, as you'll see in a picture in a second, most of these products come with two levels. The white light, which we can exist under with no problem, which does some visible light disinfection. And then there's a blue light version. This is the real oomphy, if you will, as my wife likes to say, VLD impact. And it can do a much better job of disinfecting. And these products are all LED, by the way, so they're all fairly low energy in the first place. But as you can see on the chart on the right, every day that UV or that VLD light, is operating, the germ impact in terms of daily infection becomes less and less and less. It'll never be zero, but as long as you keep your cleaning schedule up, that room is going to remain cleaner from a germ standpoint than it would be without the light. And that's really the benefit to something like this. So does it work? It does work. As you can see, here's two prestigious publications that have, and you can see from the sentences, they have resulted in reductions in both microbial contamination. SSI is surgical site infections. This is an operating room application, but significantly reduced vegetative bacteria and spores over a 72-hour point of exposure, but it does take a while. So VLD is another option that you want to be aware of. So let's summarize. UV radiation, UVGI, is an effective tool as a disinfectant. It can neutralize viruses, including the current coronavirus. UVA radiation is not effective for inactivating viruses, nor is UVB, but they can be relatively effective bacterial germicide, however, not necessarily on viruses. UV radiation is hazardous to humans in the doses necessary for effective disinfection. Okay, keep that in mind. It works great, but you have to take precautions. UV can affect surfaces, artwork, documents, surfaces, finishes. You need to be concerned about that. And again, just like VLD, UV surface irradiation is best as a supplement to a regular and consistent cleaning schedule. Do not use it as a substitute. Do not flip on a UV light source and say, okay, I'm cool, we can fire the janitor. It doesn't work that way. Summarizing visible light, and you can see the picture in the upper right. You see the white light and the blue light versions of it. That's the same luminaire, same fixture, but two different modes of operation for most effective and optimum use. VLD is visible light. It's not in the UV spectrum. It's safe for humans in normal use. It is effective against bacteria and living organisms. It does take much longer. Think hours, not minutes. It can take literally up to 24 hours to get optimum disinfection in a space using VLD. So it does take a while. VLD should not fade any colors or surfaces. There's no ultraviolet at work. There's no infrared at work. So the spaces should be safe. And again, like ultraviolet, the VLD is most effective as a supplement to standard consistent cleaning and is not a substitute. So here's the report that I referred to, and some of the information I pulled out of here because it was timely is included in this. And there's the link to it. This is a great report. It's a great read. It's easy to read, and you're bound to find, since it's a question and answer FAQ kind of a format, you're bound to find some things in there that are questions that you would have asked yourself. And you'll be able to get some of those answers. Great document, and it is a free download. And let me just add as an aside that it's almost sold out at this point, but the IES, for those of you who really want to get down into the weeds, and you really have to be an official lighting geek, I think, probably to want to do this, but on Thursday of this week, they are going to be hosting a 4-hour, fairly in-depth informational webinar on UV lighting for disinfection. I'm sure it's bound to get way over my head, but I signed up. I want to get comfy in a chair and watch it for 4 hours, but that's available too. And if you're interested in that and they still have spots open, just let us know, and we can get you the link to that. So that's the whole package in a fairly short period of time. We didn't want to keep you long, but we wanted to give you enough to chew on and to think about in terms of applying it. You probably found out that it's maybe not quite as simple as it might have seemed, but the good news is it's very effective. It does work. And as long as you take the proper precautions, you can have a very successful outcome.